Today I am finally tackling a project that has been 8 years in the making. I made this wonderful knitting bag back in 2018 and it was always intended to be the prototype, the mock-up. But I liked it so much that I have used it pretty much every day since. In fact, it has my sweater project in it now. But this was always intended just to be the first draft, and I was going to do some tweaks and make some more in some fancier fabrics. And I thought that I had a blog tutorial on this, but it turns out that I never actually said how I did this. So we're going to remedy that with this video. I'm about to show you exactly what I do to mock up this bag and share the tweaks that I wanted to make after making this version, and we're going to make a bag together. So if that sounds good to you, let's hurry up and get sewing. Hello, welcome to Show and Tell Meg. I'm Megan, and I like to make things. And today is the highly anticipated time when I'm actually going to get to sew something for the first time in over a year. I used to sew things all the time. I used to sew clothes and bags and mend things, just anything I needed, anything I could think of. But I moved in the last year, and so everything was hectic and in turmoil, and I just basically spent the entire last year knitting and crocheting and not doing my other favorite hobby, which is sewing. I figured it's a pretty easy way to dip my toes back in by doing something simple like this knitting bag. Back in 2018, the field bag was all the rage, and unfortunately the company that sold those has gone out of business. They sold off to Grainline Studios. So they do actually sell a pattern to make a bag that looks incredibly similar to this. But at the time, their bags were very pricey, and it was just not something in my budget that I could possibly afford. So since this is just a bunch of rectangles and a certain order of operations, I kind of looked up what their finished measurements were and made my own version. So this is not meant to disparage the field bag pattern. I have never used it personally because I just never found the need. But if you do want something that looks similar to this and you want a little more hand holding, then I could probably recommend that. I have used other Grainline Studio patterns and they've always been very well written. But this is sort of one of the unspoken glories of knowing how to sew is when you have sort of basic sewing knowledge, you can kind of look at things and make it up yourself. So that's what we're going to do today. Even though I didn't make a blog post about this like I thought I did, I do have my finished bag here and I love the size of it. There's a lot of things about this that I really love and some things that I want to change. Let me take my knitting out of it so I can show you all the features. So this is just a basic box style bag. I originally planned it to be much taller and then be able to fold down the brim like this, which you can do that with this version, but I had originally intended for it to be a lot taller. I ended up chopping that piece off. It was just too tall. And then I made it proportionally shorter and used that part as a binding to hold the cording in. It does have a leather handle, which the field bag also had. So I was directly copying them there. The really nice thing with this is it does have a squared off bottom, so it sits nicely. You can roll the top down, like I said, and you can kind of use this as a portable yarn bowl. Inside it does have pockets, and this is where you can kind of pick and choose what you think would be useful to you. So I deliberately designed this original bag to be a canvas and show off all of my pins. And that's all well and good, but it kind of has interfered with this pocket situation. So I did fully line this bag and it has this really cute medieval toile. It's like castles and stuff, but I had 2 fat quarters. That's all it took to do the lining of this. And I made pockets that mimicked the original field bag. One of the selling features of the field bag is that they had these grommets in the pocket like this, so that you could use it for separate balls of yarn to kind of help things from getting too tangled up while you're knitting. I have never found this useful, actually. I thought that this was going to be one of the coolest features and why I wanted to do it, but then the few times that I've used it did not work out the way that I had hoped it would. So this is a feature that I'm going to be foregoing on this next bag. If it is something that you want to do, it is super easy. You just take this pocket and put some grommets in it. But I tried to make the pocket big enough that I could put patterns and things like that. It's not quite big enough for a pattern, I will say, like when I hold the corners of the bag, so this is the available space without wrapping into the other area. I made the pocket the full size of that, and it's not big enough to fit a PDF pattern in. That's what I had hoped it would be. And it's just not. I just sort of stuff the pattern that I have printed in the bag and it works just fine. So what I'm really trying to get at is I don't really need a pocket this big anymore. I tried to have this side have parts for your pens and things like that, but unfortunately this pocket is too short to really keep the pens in. The pens were constantly falling out. So I'm trying to decide. I don't know. What do we think? Should I put a pen pocket? I've sort of changed how I do things now. With my knitting, I kind of have a small notions bag that I keep pens and stitch markers and all those kinds of things in because it really never fails. It doesn't matter how equipped a bag is said to be, it just ends up being a jumbled mess if I don't have everything contained in something smaller. So, to that effect, ooh, this is literally on the fly an idea here. Since I know that that is the case, maybe I make a separate notions bag that matches. I did do those pockets and I can kind of give you the rundown of what to do. It's actually very easy. But for this one, I don't think I'm going to put pockets. I might put one small one, kind of in the same spot, upper back, middle area, maybe like business card sized, just to put notions and that kind of thing. If I do forget my notions bag or something like that, I can put stitch markers and small stuff in there. But overall, the inside is going to be pretty much the same except without the pockets. That just simplifies things even more. The other tweak that I am going to make, definitely, and I have wanted to make this ever since I finished this bag. I immediately noticed my mistake. I only have the drawstring on one side, and it does kind of work, but this is kind of thick cording, and it's not ideal. If you actually want a bag like this to truly close, because you saw how hard I pulled that, and this is kind of as closed as it gets. So if you want it to be really closed, you need two cords, one on this end, one on this end, and you pull it away from each other. And I did not have that as an option. This side is sewed closed. So I didn't want to unpick it at the time, and it's been fine. I mean, I've been using this obviously for 8 years, and I still use it. It's still like my favorite knitting bag. So we are going to do double-ended with the cords, and I'm going to keep the leather handle, but I might switch up the type that I use. So this is what we are mocking up, and that's what we're going to use to get all the measurements that I'm about to give you. And I do have a fabric that I have picked out that has started this. Now, logic would say I should make a different one first out of a fabric I loved less, but I know that this is going to work out, so it's going to be fine. We're going to jump right in with my absolutely beautiful Rifle Paper Company fabric. It has books all over it. I just love it. It's all classic novels, that kind of thing. So we're going to use this as the main fabric. And then I was hemming and hawing, but I decided I'm going to use this as the contrast. So this is going to be at the top binding and the lining on the inside. And I'm honestly kind of torn three ways on my handle. I didn't know that I was going to have such a hard time deciding this. But this original leather that I used on this handle, I scalped from a couch. It was in the trash for a week and a half at a condo I used to live in, and I let it sit there. I didn't do anything until I was absolutely certain that no one was going to take it. It started to get mildew in certain places on the couch because it had been rained on. So I have like 4 to 6 couch cushions worth of leather. And it's this really beigey kind of color. So it works out perfect. I can both color it or use it as it is. So I have plenty of pieces like this. This was probably off of the arm of one of the edges of the couch. And they make really great handles. So I do have that. And it really does kind of work color wise. So I don't know. It looks pretty good with that lining too. So this is a pretty good contender, I have to say, just keeping it the color that it is. But I also have some that I have painted gold. I used Angela's leather paint because I had originally planned on using a different Rifle Paper Company fabric that has gold on it, which this does too. It's just much smaller flecks. And I'm trying to kind of see in my little viewfinder here. It looks pretty good. I mean, it's a gold handle. So I don't know. That one could be fun too. But then when I was in my leather stash to get those pieces, I also came across this belt. This is just a thrifted braided leather belt, and I don't know, that looks pretty cute, especially with the book vibes. It gives kind of like the dark wood of a bookcase. So I don't know. I'm looking in my mirror to see if I like it. I do like it. So we're gonna see. I'm trying to decide. This one, it would mostly come down to how I'm going to secure it. This is a thicker leather than the other pieces because it is braided and it was worn as a belt. So I don't know. It is really cute though. We're going to decide. But those are my choices for the handle. And since this is kind of a tutorial, I guess I should tell you the materials that you're going to need. Obviously, you need your main fabric and you need a lining. I have not yet done this, so I don't know exactly how much this is going to be, but I will put the amount that you're going to need over here. You're also going to want to get a bag interfacing. This is just something I used on the original bag, and it works great for bags. I've made quite a few bags and used this exact same interfacing for them. So this is Pellon 40, and it is sold as a mid-weight stabilizer. It is sew in. I'm not a big fan of the glue-on kind because it never fails. They always separate over time, especially if you have to wash them or anything like that, which I definitely have had to wash that bag. So Pellon 40 is nice and crisp. It's just going to add a bit of structure to the bag. Then you're going to need your handle material, which mine is obviously some type of leather, but you can also use webbing. You can even use your main fabric if you want to, or the lining. You would just want to heavily interface it, probably more than the rest of the bag, to give it some real stability. And then you're going to need some cording for that drawstring at the top. Also, if you want grommets or things like that, that's something to plan for now. And we're also going to obviously need coordinating thread, that kind of thing. So I think that's it. That's all the particulars that you really need. And we can just jump right into making the bag. Okay, we are going to measure my original bag here. So I'm going corner to corner. This is information that I was originally able to get off of that company's website, but since they are no more, it does not exist anymore. So the width right here is 9 inches. And then the depth to the center is 2.5 inches. And so to envision this, you're going to have to imagine sort of a block letter I. So it's going to be a wider section here. So if that middle section that I want to be the outward facing area is going to be 9 inches across, then I have to add that 2.5 inches of depth to each side to make the sides of the bag. So that's going to be 9 plus 5, which is 14. And then we're going to add seam allowances to this. So I'm going to add 1/2 inch to each side, which gives me a 15-inch cutting length. Now we're going to look at the height. So this is where you can really make it whatever height you want. My bag, since I know that it has been a really good height for what I wanted, I'm just going to go off of that. And so feel free to do what I do if you would like. And mine is 9 inches tall. Since I do have the seam in the bottom of this bag, so that means instead of an I shape, it's going to be like 2 halves that would make a big block letter I. So my very official mock-up here, this rectangle is going to be 15 inches across. It's going to be 9 inches tall. And then we're going to measure in 3 inches here and down. And then this piece right here is going to be 10 inches across. And that's just so that way we have all of our seam allowances included. Everywhere is happy. It's going to be the height that we want, all those kinds of things. The next thing to decide would be pockets if you want them. I'm not going to be doing these pockets, but I will let you know how big they are. So my pocket that I put the grommets in is 9 inches across. So that this is just a piece of rectangular material. So you're going to cut it 10 inches across, which accounts for the seam allowance. It is currently 4.5 inches tall. So that means that I cut this 5.5 inches tall. If you want it a little taller, make it a little taller. Like, this is entirely up to you. It's not an exact science on the pockets. The other side, I made a piece that was exactly the same size. So I cut mine 10 by 5.5, but admittedly, this is not tall enough to keep pens in there. So if you want the pens to stay in nicely, you're going to want to make it a little taller than I did. I'm going to make a pocket that's 4 by 3. So I'm going to cut a rectangle that is 5 by 4 inches just to make sure I have enough seam allowance and everybody's happy. The other piece that I'm going to have us cut is this binding piece, because I did do that as a separate added on piece at the end. And to do that, I'm going to use the exact same measurement that I used for the bag itself. So you're going to want it to be 15 inches long. And then on this original bag, I made this part 3/4 of an inch tall. So that's going to be 1.5 inches both sides. So it depends on the seam allowance that you want. I will just note that this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance instead of the half like I did for all the others. So I'm going to cut this 2 inches wide. If you want to be safe, you could cut it 2.5, and then In the end, you're going to top stitch it on the outside, so you can kind of decide if that's too wide or not enough. So I think I might do that. I think I'm going to cut it 15 inches long, and then I'm going to make it 2.5 inches wide, just a long strip, and I need 2 of those. The other thing to consider is the handle. So this piece of leather that I used on the original bag, I cut this piece 1.5 inches wide, and I cut it the exact same length as the other piece. I made it 15 inches long, but we are going to angle it. So cut it 15 inches, and then you'll be able to lop off the excess after we angle it in the seam. Since we are going to be using a sew-in lining, you also want to create a lining for every section of this that needs it. So you're going to want to cut that same size piece that you made for the outer fabric in the lining, and then where you were cutting 2 pieces for each outer piece of the pocket, you're going to want to cut 1 for the inside. So cut it the same as your pocket size, just only cut 1, not 2. So over here, I will list all of those things that I just mentioned. Feel free to screenshot this. It'll make it a lot easier, or you can write this down, whatever makes it easier, but I'm going to go start cutting these things out. I have everything cut out, so I have a lot of pieces that look like this. I have 2 of my sew-in interfacing, 2 of my lining, and then 2 of my outer fabric. I also went ahead and cut the 15-inch by 2.5-inch strip of the drawstring top casing thing, and then I cut out my pocket. And I know I said I was going to do 4x3, but I just kind of went by what this piece was left, and so this is the size. It doesn't matter. It's a pocket. It could be whatever size you want. So the next step is going to be sewing some of these pieces together. I'm going to layer the outer fabric with the sew-in interfacing, line that up completely, and we're going to treat it as one. And I'm going to line up the back piece the exact same way, sew-in interfacing on one side, back piece on the other, and then we're going to put them right sides together as a 4-piece stack. And then since I'm over here, I'm also going to line up my lining right sides together. If there's a right side, mine is exactly the same on both sides, so I'm just going to lay them together. And we're doing this as a box bag bottom, so I'm going to sew the side seams together first. So I'm going to do side and side, and I allotted for a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can just sew that at whatever you allotted when you cut it. And then I'm going to press those open, and then we will meet back to do the box bottom move. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the outer fabric. As this big blob of 4 layers of fabric here, I'm going to sew the side seams first, then we'll come back and do the corners and the bottom. And realistically, while I'm over there doing it, I'm going to do my pocket as well. So this is one that I know I'm going to need to flip this so that the whole thing is facing outward. So I'm going to layer right side to right side with my fabric, and then put the sew-in interfacing on the wrong side of one of them. And I'm going to sew that almost all the way around. We're going to go starting here, over here, up, over, down, over, leaving like a 2-inch gap so that we can flip that right side out, and we're going to top stitch it after. The only thing that we're not doing anything with is that strip for the casing. We're just going to let that sit aside. So I'm going to go batch sew all of these and then meet back and show you what to do next. While I'm over here, I forgot to say, so I did the side seams, but I'm also going to sew the very bottom bit as well. So do that too, and then we'll meet back. I forgot. I need to clip the corners off of this because I'm about to try to turn it. So I want to make sure that I can get a nice crisp corner. So I'm going to clip that off and then flip this over. So now I'm going to use my point turner here. I do have a point turner, but I couldn't find it. So we're going to use a knitting needle and push those corners out so they make a nice crisp point. Okay, so everybody is pointed now, and I want to make sure that I have this in the exact way I want it to look, because once I do this, it's done, and I'm going to see this pocket all the time. So take your time, make sure that the points are crisp enough. Try to roll the seam outward as much as you can, because we're going to press this and then we're going to top stitch. All right, I have my main pieces sewn, and I did press them open. If I wasn't lining this, I would definitely want to finish these edges, but since I'm lining it, I just have them pressed open. Okay, now that we have everything pressed and everything, we're going to make the box bottom. So in order to do this, I'm going to find the corner, stick my fingers at the seam, open that up like a circle, and then I'm going to match up seam line to seam line so that that's completely centered, and then I'm going to flatten that out. For this, I am going to use some clips. You can use pins. I generally try not to use pins and things, but for things like this, just to keep it nice and straight, I'm going to clip that in place. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on all of those corners. So I'm going to do it to the other side of the lining, and I'm going to do it for both sides of the outer fabric as well. On the front piece, because it is two pieces, since I used sew-in interfacing, I'm just putting my hand inside to make extra sure that I have everything lined up and that the front fabric doesn't like flop down in there. Okay, so it actually looks like a basket now. So we're going to go back to the sewing machine, and I'm going to go along that line that we just pinned. We're going to sew that down. I'm also going to top stitch this pocket, and I'm going to try to get it as close to the edge as I can. I usually like to follow one leg of the presser foot, and it works out to be like 1/8 of an inch, roughly 1/8 of 6, something like that. And I'm going to top stitch all the way around the pocket, so it's good to go. The other thing that I need to do before I finish off here is I need to sew my pocket into the lining. So in order to do that, I'm going to just sort of eyeball it on mine. I should have told you to do that before you sewed the side seams, honestly, so I'm very sorry. I will try to correct this for later, but it's too late for me. So I'm just eyeballing it. I am going to make sure that I like the placement and that it is level with the top, and I'm going to pin it there and top stitch it on. I now have my pocket sewn in the lining corner is sewn, and the corners of the main bag are sewn, and so I'm going to press these. I'm going to just try to make it as crisp as I can. I'm going to press them upward just because my material is really wanting to bend that way anyway. In your case, you might want to press them differently. All right, moment of truth, we're going to flip it and see how it looks. And I'm shoving my fingernails in there to get a nice crisp corner, which I have. Yay! It looks great. Wow. Okay, this is pretty good, y'all. Look at that. Unintentional, somewhat thought about, but not painstakingly placed seam matching along those seams. That's pretty good, I have to say. Not what I was expecting to see. Okay. So now that this is pressed as well, we're going to shove it inside. And then once again, we're going to match up those seam allowances. So I have my inner fabric lining seam allowance and my outer fabric seam allowance, and I'm just going to line those up and clip them together. And then once those sides are clipped, I'm going to persuade everything to sit like it should, and then clip all around the edge as well. All right, so we have our bag technically assembled, and then this is the inside of mine. So now we're at the point that I have to decide what I want to do for the top. The first thing that we need to do for the strip that's going to hold the drawstring is we're going to finish off the edges. So I'm going to fold those in the amount of seam allowance that I allowed for this and press that down, and then we'll come back and we'll start pinning it to the bag itself. This is also the moment when I try to use this belt, which I do really like the look of. I think it's classy. So I'm going to switch to a heavy duty needle just for this one part, because that is very, very important. This is a lot of small pieces of leather, and I don't want to make my machine too upset. I'm trying to get an angle like this when the bag is flat. So I'm going to hold it at the angle that I want and then lop it off level right there, if that makes sense. So you want this much to be sticking up off of the bag, and then you can just cut off any excess that you have at that time. And in my case, since I don't want this to fray, I'm actually going to just clip it into the position that I want it to be in and sew it and then cut it off of the belt. So I am placing this from my side seam. The edge here that overlaps is right at 4 inches from the side seam that we just sewed. So if that helps, that gives a really nice position. I have found that this one has worked out really great. So that's where I'm going to sew my first one down. Sorry about the overhead lighting, but it's the winter and now it's nice and late. So I sewed the belt, and surprisingly, it went without issue. And this is exactly what happened when I sewed the leather on this one. I was fully prepared for the machine to hate it and to freak out, and no, it just sewed through it like a champ. So just try with your machine, take it slow, use a heavy duty needle if you have one, but I just used a regular universal needle. It will make your needle dull faster, so that is something to think about. But I have my strap on now, and then I did top stitch the edges. I folded my edges in 1/2 inch, and then I top stitched them down because they're going to be what the cord goes through to pull the drawstring. I'm going to clip this in place, making sure that I make all of those bits on the edges. Since we didn't finish any of the seams, there are going to be frayed edges. So I know it's kind of hard to show. I'm going to pin this first to the lining, and we're going to sew it down from the lining side first. And I'm going to try to line that folded bit right up to the seam. If it doesn't quite make it to the other side, then we'll adjust, but it should go just right next to or right at that seam line with how we did all the seam allowances and everything. And so I'm just going down and clipping this in place the whole way down. It is a teensy bit shorter, so I'm gonna level it out a little. So there's that side, and then I'm going to do the same exact thing to the other side and clip this into the lining itself. All right, so I have that all clipped, and now I'm gonna go on my machine, keeping in mind the color that I am going to be seeing. So I'm having this color show. We're gonna stitch this on each side of the top, and then I'm gonna wrap that over. We're gonna press that outward, and then we're gonna fold seam allowance underneath and top stitch down on the outside. So we want the thread color that you want to be seen on that piece to be the one that you stitch this on with. All right, I have sewn those pieces down, and I just pressed it downward. Now I'm going to press it upward because we want this to stick out like a big flap right here. It is now pressed upward, so I had flipped it inside out to do that part. I'm gonna flip it right side out again. So now is when I have to decide how tall I want this part to be, because I'm going to press the excess down because we're going to fold it down and then top stitch that. So let's see. I'm liking the look of about an inch, I think. That looks like, if I can hold it still so hard without pressing it. I'm liking the look of this. So I'm going to go get my seam gauge. I'm going to measure it evenly across and I'm going to press that down all the way across. Okay. So I've already completed one side just to make sure that what I was telling you to do worked, and it does. So you're going to go to the iron, fold down 1/2 inch or whatever it is you gave for seam allowance on this. I did 1/2 inch, so I folded that over, and now I'm going to lay that pretty much directly on top of the bobbin stitches from when I secured the other side. So we want to fold it over and have it just barely cover those stitches, because then when we top stitch, we're not going to have a whole bunch of different lines. When you actually look on the inside, it looks very clean that way when you get it as close to the other line as you can. So I'm taking my long sewing clips here, and I'm also making sure that there's no unwieldy fray pieces that are sticking out as I go, because I don't want any unsightly threads hanging out of my lovely knitting bag. So I'm just clipping this into position. Also paying attention at the end to try to match the other side. You don't want one side to be like wildly taller or anything than the other. So I am clipped on, and now I'm going to go as close as I can to that edge without falling over, and I'm going to top stitch that down all the way on this side. It's on, and it honestly lined up pretty well. The only thing is, because I hadn't done this before, I did leave a little bit of this exposed. I'm going to put some fray check on it. If yours did that, I'm very sorry. Hopefully I will work out the kinks on that, and I will try to figure out what the difference is. I should have just not folded this over quite so much. I should have made up the difference right there, and then it would have gone all the way to the edge. So try to be aware of that. When you are top stitching this area down, you want to make sure that it lines it up exactly with how long you have. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a little bit of exposed fraying seams. So I am just clipping all my threads, making sure everything is tidy in there. And so technically I have a bag. Now all I have to do is add a drawstring. So the next thing we have to do is figure out how long we want the cord to be. So this is going to thread through both sides and come out on one side. And you're going to do it 2 times. So I'm going to hold this and figure I want about 4 inches sticking off at the end. And then there. So we've got 18 inches, so double that, and we're going to have 36 inches. So I'm going to cut 2 cords that are 36 inches long. And in my case, because I am a knitter, which I imagine you are too if you're making a knitting bag, I am going to use a very large darning needle to try to thread this through, because this is not super thick cord. If you have thicker cording though, then you're going to want to cover up the edge, and then you're going to need a bodkin or a safety pin, something like that, to thread this through. But mine just happens to be an appropriate size that I can get it through with this darning needle. So I'm going to start this one from here, and I'm just going to try to work it the whole way down. The only place that you have to try to watch it is at the end where that fabric is folded over. You want to make sure that it doesn't catch any of that, so it comes through. Get out. All right, I got one side through. So now I'm going to do it the other side. Okay. Now I can pull that off with a darning needle. And then I'm going to pull my edges so that they are even with each other. And I'm going to tie them into a knot. Probably should do a double knot just to make it extra secure. Don't want that unraveling on us. Okay. 2 knots, and then I'm gonna trim my edges just so everything's nice and tidy. So there's my end, and that worked out kind of perfectly. It's the perfect length to hang out. And now I'm gonna repeat that with the other side. But I'm going to start at the opposite end because you want 2 drawstrings. You want 1 drawstring to pull on each side. So I'm starting from the other way. You could also do like a bead at the end. That would be really cute. And actually, I'm kind of bummed I didn't think of that before because I have some like 70s wooden beads around here somewhere, and that would be really cool. So that's something I might add later on. Okay, so I got it through the one end, and now I'm doing the same thing one final time. Ooh, that was almost a problem. So sadly, I unraveled this a bit, but we're gonna fix that after. So I'm gonna do the same thing. Gonna put these together, do a nice knot there, and then I'm gonna do another one. Pull it really, really tight. And then same kind of thing. I'm gonna try to make it about the same length as the other side, just to give it a snip. And now the big moment, ready? Yay! And now I have finished my knitting bag, and it's so cute. I'm so excited. I have seriously been wanting to do this for 8 years, which just sounds ridiculous, but I had so many other projects that I wanted to do, and that other bag worked great. And I loved it. I love that you can, see all my pins. That's why I did the white fabric, right? But now I'm very excited to show this fabric off. This was one that I was really excited to grab in my recent sewing studio haul, which I do have a video of if you want to see. But this is my first project making out of all those fabrics. And this is my first project, period, in over a year because of moving and everything. So I think for my first foray back into sewing, this was a fantastic project to try. Now for the true test, we're going to put a knitting project in it. So I have my whole pattern here. I'm gonna stick that in there. And then I have a spare skein of yarn, the current skein of yarn, and half of a sweater. And we're gonna shove all that in there. Give it a shake. And yay! I really love this. I love the whole thing, but I really love this handle. I am so glad that I noticed that in my stash of leather. Like, I think it looks just like a old school bookshelf with all these nice books on it. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that this tutorial was coherent enough that you could make this yourself. I hope that it at least showed that this is not a complicated project at all. So if you want to make this, it's completely doable and you do not need a pattern. That said, again, however, if you do want a pattern, the field bag from Grainline should be exactly what you need. But I am thrilled that I did not have to buy another pattern, and I think it looks so cute. I'm so excited to use it. And to be real, like, look how dirty this one is. I've washed it and it's, it's white twill. There's only so much you can do. So I am thrilled to have a fresh new bag that I can carry my projects around in. And the other reason that you want to have the handle at an angle is, check this out. You can actually hold it like this and knit, and it works like a yarn bowl, like a portable one. So many good things about this shape of bag. I hope that you do give it a try. If you do, please leave me a comment. And actually, I would love to see what you make. I do put my email address in the description of all of my videos, so please just scroll down and find my email and send me a picture if you do use this to make yourself a bag. I would love to see what you come up with. So that is all that I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that this tutorial was useful. If you did like this, please do give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to stick around and see more. I have other plans to make more accessories to go with this, so hopefully that's something that will be coming out soon. And until that day, I hope that you can enjoy your very own faux field bag and that you can carry all of your knitting projects with absolute style.